What if I told you Detroit's quietly reshaping this roster, and most fans still aren't looking at it the right way? What if the real story of this Lions training camp isn't just the players everybody's already talking about, but the depth pieces flying under the radar? And what happens to this defense if two of its best players aren't full participants when the pads come out? That's what's happening in Allen Park right now, Lions Nation. Jake here on Detroit Lions Lovers, and yeah, everybody's talking about this news, but not everybody's connecting the dots the right way. Brad Holmes has made a string of moves that tell you exactly what this coaching staff is bracing for. A veteran, linebacker addition nobody saw coming. A receiver room that's turning into one of the deepest position battles in the NFL, and 3 key starters landing on the PUP list right as camp opens. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we're covering this team all the way through week 1. Let's get into it. Quick timeline for context. Rookies reported to camp this past Saturday, veterans are reporting today, Tuesday, and the pads come out for real tomorrow, Wednesday, so everything we're about to break down is happening right now, this week, as this roster gets set for what a lot of people around the league already consider a legitimate NFC contender heading into the fall. Let's start here. Detroit has agreed to terms with veteran linebacker Troy Reeder. Not exactly a name that trends on social media, and that's kind of the point. This is a we know what we're doing move, not a look at us move. Reeder is 31 years old right now. He turns 32 this September, and his path to Detroit is more well-traveled than most people realize. He broke into the league as an undrafted free agent with the Rams back in 2019, and that first stint ran through 2021, which is when he picked up a Super Bowl ring as part of that championship roster. From there, he signed with the Chargers for the 2022 season, then agreed to a deal with the Minnesota Vikings in March of 2023. That Vikings stint didn't stick. He was let go right before the regular season started, and the Rams scooped him right back up. First onto their practice squad and then their active roster. He spent 3 more seasons back in Los Angeles before hitting free agency again this offseason. 4 organizations, 4 different systems, and every single year he's found a way to carve out a role. Here's the connection Lions fans need to know. When Reeder came into the league in 2019, Brad Holmes was the Rams' director of college scouting. This isn't some agent cold calling Detroit with a resume. Holmes has history with this guy, going all the way back to when Reeder was fighting just to make that Rams roster as an undrafted rookie. Holmes knows exactly what he's getting. The coachability, the football IQ, the way he communicates on the field. So here's a question worth sitting with. Why does a team that just handed its top linebacker a $20 million extension still bother signing a guy most fans have never heard of? Because right now, this defense needs exactly what Reeder brings. My prediction on this one, don't be surprised if Reeder quietly becomes one of Dan Campbell's favorite camp bodies by the 2nd or 3rd week of practice. Guys who communicate fast and never miss a defensive check tend to win coaches over long before their name shows up in a stat line. Let's be clear about what this signing is and isn't. Reeder isn't walking into Detroit and taking a starting job. Jack Campbell is the unquestioned leader of that linebacker room right now. Detroit locked him up with a long-term extension back in May worth over $20 million a year, and he's playing like a bona fide all-pro. Derek Barnes and Malcolm Rodriguez are still fighting for snaps too, especially with longtime starter Alex Anzalone gone in free agency after years of anchoring that room. Somebody has to help replace that experience in the meeting room, even if it's not on the stat sheet, and that's a big part of what Reeder brings right now. What he gives this defense is something you can't always put a stat next to: reliability. A guy who's logged real NFL snaps, understands complex defensive concepts, adds value on special teams, and takes pressure off the young guys during a grueling training camp schedule. So what should you actually watch for? If Reeder shows up making pre-snap calls and lining guys up correctly within the first few practices, that's your sign he sticks all the way to final cuts. If he's still processing information slowly by week 2, that's when you start hearing his name in roster bubble talk. Now here's a bigger question. Why would a team with 2 of the best receivers in the entire NFC go out and sign 4 more wideouts most casual fans are barely paying attention to? Because right now, wide receiver is the single deepest, most competitive room on this entire roster. And once you hear the reasoning, it's going to make total sense. The Lions brought in 4 different receivers, and each of their stories tells you something about how Brad Holmes evaluates talent. First, Tarik Black. Fun local angle, Black actually started his college career right here in the state, playing at Michigan before transferring to Texas to finish his eligibility. He's 28, 6'3", built like a big possession target, and after going undrafted in 2021, he bounced around the league with stops in Indianapolis, with the Jets, in Baltimore, in Pittsburgh, and with Miami. This past spring, he found a groove with the Louisville Kings in the UFL, emerging as one of their top deep threats. 27 catches for right around 390 yards, and tied for the team lead with 3 touchdowns. My prediction on Black, he's the guy most likely to show up in early camp highlight reels because of his size and his ability to win contested catches down the field. Beat reporters love printing that stuff in August. Just don't confuse buzz with a locked-in roster spot yet. Next, Lucky Jackson, who's coming over from that same Louisville Kings championship roster. The Kings went 6-4 in the regular season and then knocked off the DC Defenders to win the UFL title, so both Jackson and Black are walking into Allen Park with a winning pedigree fresh off the field. Jackson already has real NFL experience, time with the Minnesota Vikings organization, where head coach Kevin O'Connell publicly praised how he stepped up in practice reps when Justin Jefferson went down with an injury. That's a coach on record saying this guy can handle real NFL reps. Add in his production with Louisville and his ability as a punt returner, and you've got a legitimate shot to carve out a role. If I'm ranking this group of 4 right now, Jackson's my early bet to be the last man standing. He's already proven he can hold up in a real NFL offense under real pressure. Then there's Tay Martin, who spent his spring with the Columbus Aviators and was one of the UFL's most productive slot options, over 40 catches and nearly 500 yards. Martin's college days were split between Washington State and Oklahoma State, and he's already logged NFL time with the 49ers, the Titans, and the Commanders, even hauling in a 49-yard touchdown catch with Tennessee. At 6'1", he offers a different body type than Black, and he could complement the size the Lions already have at the top of the depth chart with Amon-Ra St. and Jameson Williams. And finally, Lawrence Keys III, out of the Houston Gamblers, the last of the 4 to sign. Keys was one of the most explosive all-purpose players in the entire UFL, over 1,000 combined yards between receiving and return work. He's a Tulane product who had a brief taste of the NFL with the Buffalo Bills before heading to the Spring League. Keys is a name I want you to remember for one specific reason. If Detroit's return game struggles at all in the preseason, don't be shocked if he's the one who gets a look on kickoffs and punts before he even gets meaningful offensive reps. So why is this happening right now? Why go get 4 receivers when the top of this depth chart is already loaded? It comes down to manufactured competition, insurance against injury, and special teams value, because contributing on kick and punt coverage is often the difference between making the 53 and getting cut. Out of these 4 guys, realistically, maybe 1 or 2 make the initial roster. It's entirely possible none of them do, and that's fine, because competition itself sharpens everybody around them, including second-year receiver Isaac Tesla, who a lot of us expect to take a real leap this season. Here's my broader prediction for this whole receiver battle. I'd bet on this group producing at least 1 surprise practice squad stash that Detroit calls up in October or November when the injuries inevitably start piling up. And here's how Detroit actually landed at 4 receivers in the first place, because it connects to some tough news. Back in June, rookie 5th-round pick Kendrick Law, a name a lot of Lions fans were genuinely excited about out of Alabama and Kentucky, suffered a season-ending torn ACL early in a non-contact drill at OTAs. That injury opened a roster spot, and Detroit initially filled it with an undrafted receiver named Kyer Duplessis. But once Black, Jackson, and Martin all signed, the numbers didn't work anymore, and Duplessis was ultimately waived to make room for Lawrence Keys. This isn't some dramatic falling out, it's just how NFL roster building works in the summer. Brad Holmes constantly churns the bottom of this roster, testing new talent and making room the moment a better opportunity presents itself. And it happens on every team in the league every single July. Now here's the question that should actually worry you a little bit. What happens to this defense if 2 of its best players aren't full participants once camp really gets going? The Lions have announced that 3 significant players are starting training camp on the PUP list right now. That's safety Brian Branch, safety Kerby Joseph, and newly signed tight end Tyler Conklin. Start with Branch. This one we saw coming. He suffered a torn Achilles late last season in Week 14, and that's an injury with a well-documented recovery timeline. He's 24 years old and the emotional and physical engine of this secondary right now, a guy who lines up in the slot, at safety, blitzes off the edge, and directs traffic before the snap like a coach on the field. Players on the standard PUP list can be activated at any point once they're medically cleared, and Dan Campbell has said Branch hasn't had setbacks in his rehab, which is genuinely encouraging. But if he's still on PUP once the roster gets trimmed down, he'd have to move to reserve PUP, which means missing a minimum of the first 4 regular season games. That's the number every Lions fan needs to have in the back of their mind right now. My prediction, given how positive Campbell's language has already been, I expect Branch activated off PUP within the first couple weeks of camp, well before roster cutdowns. If that timeline slips, that's when the panic should actually start. Then there's Kerby Joseph, still dealing with the aftermath of a knee injury that limited him to just 6 games last season. Joseph is 25, and when healthy, he's one of the premier deep coverage safeties in this league right now. A legitimate ball hawk who changes the way opposing quarterbacks read the field. If he's out for an extended stretch, that changes communication in the back end and throws younger safeties into bigger roles earlier than anybody planned. Watch the walkthrough reports closely. If Joseph looks anywhere close to 100% once he's cleared for individual drills, expect this staff to activate him fairly quickly. And finally, Tyler Conklin, who Detroit signed this offseason as a free agent to be the team's 3rd tight end behind Sam Laporta and Brock Wright. Conklin picked up an undisclosed injury during spring practices, and we should get more clarity once Dan Campbell talks to the media as camp opens. Losing his reps, even temporarily, means guys like Jackson Meeks, Zach Horton, Thomas Gordon, and undrafted rookie Miles Kitselman all get extra chances to make an impression right now. Keep an eye on Kitselman specifically. Undrafted rookies who get extended run with the second-team offense in August sometimes turn into real depth pieces by week 1, and if Conklin's absence drags on, that's exactly the door that opens for him. Here's what matters, though. Starting camp on PUP doesn't mean a player is doomed to miss the season. It's actually really common for guys to come off that list within days of camp opening once they clear medical evaluations. But it does mean every practice update over the next few weeks is going to matter, and we'll be tracking it daily, right here on this channel. So what am I personally watching for at every single practice from here on out? Who wins the third and fourth receiver spots out of Black, Jackson, Martin, and Keys, and whether any of them separate enough early that the Cincinnati preseason opener on August 13th turns into a real audition instead of just a formality. Whether Troy Reeder is drawing first-team reps at all by the second week, or settling into a pure special teams role behind Campbell, Barnes, and Rodriguez. How fast Branch and Joseph get activated off PUP. Because that timeline alone tells you almost everything about how this defense is going to look when the lights come on in September. Whether Conklin beats his own injury back in time to hold off the tight end depth chart, or whether an undrafted guy like Kitselman forces his way into that week 1 conversation. And whether Kendrick Law's ACL recovery stays on track for 2027, because that's a storyline we haven't even started talking about yet. And given how serious that injury is, it's one worth keeping on your radar as the season unfolds, rather than expecting anything rushed. Here's the thing, though. None of these 3 stories are as loud as a blockbuster trade. But this is exactly how Brad Holmes has rebuilt the culture in Detroit, with just as much intention at the bottom of the roster as at the top. We're all going to spend the next month talking about Jared Goff, Aiden Hutchinson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we should, because that star power is what makes this a legitimate NFC contender right now. But depth built the right way in July is very often the difference between a good team and a team hoisting the Lombardi Trophy in February. And that's really the lens I want you watching this camp through. It's easy to only pay attention when a star player takes the field, but the real story of this franchise's turnaround has always been in the details. The guy who wins a special teams job. The veteran who calms down a young room. The depth receiver who ends up starting a playoff game because of an injury nobody saw coming. Detroit's front office has built an organization where that stuff isn't an accident anymore. It's the plan. This fan base spent a long time hoping for a team that took every single roster decision this seriously, and now we've got one. And honestly, that's worth enjoying every single day of this camp, not just the days with a splashy headline attached. So let me ask you this before you go. Out of those 4 receivers, who do you think actually makes this roster? Drop a comment and tell me who you're betting on. Hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed to Detroit Lions Lovers yet, now's the time. We've got training camp coverage coming all the way through the Cincinnati opener. I'm Jake. This has been Detroit Lions Lovers, and I'll see you in the next one. Go Lions.